She signed the divorce papers in tears, tore up the pregnancy test. 6 years later, everything changed. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to American Stories of Kindness. Today, I bring you a powerful and deeply moving story. The rain hammered against the windows of the lawyer's office as Isabella Monroe stared at the divorce papers spread before her. Each word on the page felt like a dagger, carving away at the dream she once held so tightly. Across the mahogany desk sat Ethan Caldwell, his jaw set firm, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The man she had fallen in love with 5 years ago now felt like a stranger wrapped in an expensive suit. Isabella's hands trembled as she picked up the pen. This was it. The end of everything they had built together. The end of late-night conversations, shared laughter, and whispered promises. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the scratching of pen on paper. She signed her name, each letter feeling heavier than the last. Ethan reached for the document without a word, his signature joining hers in what felt like a final act of betrayal. When he stood to leave, Isabella wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to fight for what they once had. But pride kept her silent, just as it kept them both from truly communicating for months. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed like thunder in her chest. Isabella sat frozen for several minutes before gathering her belongings with shaking hands. The receptionist offered a sympathetic smile that Isabella couldn't return. She rushed to the bathroom, locking herself in the stall as tears finally broke free. It was then that she remembered the test in her purse, the pregnancy test she had taken that morning, still wrapped in tissue paper, hidden away like a guilty secret. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out and stared at the 2 pink lines that had appeared hours earlier. 2 lines that changed everything. 2 lines that came too late. Isabella pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing life was growing there. A piece of Ethan that she would carry forever, even as he walked out her life. The irony was cruel. They had tried for a baby during their marriage, had filled out adoption papers, and visited fertility clinics. And now, when everything was falling apart, nature had finally answered their prayers. But she couldn't tell him. Not now. Not when his face had been so cold, so distant. Not when every conversation over the past 6 months had ended in arguments about his work, her feelings of abandonment, and the growing chasm between them. Ethan had become consumed by his business empire, leaving Isabella to wonder if she had ever truly mattered at all. She tore the tests into pieces, watching them fall into the trash like the remnants of her marriage. This baby would be hers alone. She would protect this child from the pain of feeling unwanted, from growing up in a home filled with resentment and broken promises. That night, Isabella packed her belongings from the apartment they had shared. Each item she placed in boxes felt like saying goodbye to a version of herself that no longer existed. She found their wedding album tucked in a drawer and allowed herself one moment to flip through the pages. There they were, young, full of hope, dancing under string lights, kissing in the rain, laughing like the world belonged to them. She closed the album and left it on the kitchen counter. Some memories were too heavy to carry forward. The following months were a blur of morning sickness, doctor appointments, and the overwhelming task of rebuilding her life from scratch. Isabella moved to a smaller neighborhood across town. Far from the luxury of her former life, she found work as a freelance graphic designer, taking on projects from her laptop. While her belly grew round with life, Samantha Rivers, her best friend since college, became her lifeline. Samantha was there for every ultrasound, every late-night craving, every moment of doubt. When Isabella wondered if she had made the right choice, it was Samantha who held her hand in the delivery room when Lila was born, a tiny, perfect being with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Looking at her daughter for the first time, Isabella knew she had made the right decision. This little girl would grow up surrounded by love, even if that love came from only one parent. She would never know the pain of watching her parents destroy each other with words and silence. 6 years passed like pages turning in a book. Isabella built a life that was simple but full. Their small house had a garden where Lila loved to play, chasing butterflies and making up elaborate stories about fairy kingdoms. Isabella worked from home, taking on design projects that paid the bills and allowed her to be present for every moment of her daughter's childhood. Lila was bright and curious, always asking questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to where babies came from. When she asked about her father, Isabella gave vague answers. He lives far away. Maybe someday you'll meet him. The lies tasted bitter, but they were easier than the truth. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Caldwell had built an empire. His company had grown from a modest startup to a major player in commercial real estate. His face appeared in business magazines. His name was spoken with respect in boardrooms across the country. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted, yet success tasted hollow. Ethan lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city, surrounded by expensive art and designer furniture that felt cold and impersonal. At night, when the business calls ended and the meetings concluded, he found himself thinking about Isabella. He wondered where she was, if she was happy, if she ever thought about him. He dated occasionally. Elegant women who understood his lifestyle and didn't demand too much of his time. But none of them made him feel the way Isabella once had. None of them challenged him, laughed at his terrible jokes, or saw past the businessman to the man underneath. He had let the best thing in his life slip away because he was too proud, focused on building an empire, to notice he was losing his kingdom. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was scheduled to meet with potential investors at a small coffee shop in a neighborhood he rarely visited. His driver had taken a wrong turn, and they ended up parking near an elementary school, just as classes were letting out. Ethan was reviewing documents in the back seat when something made him look up. Children poured out of the building in a chaos of backpacks and laughter, and there, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls, was Isabella. His heart stopped. 6 years had passed, but he would recognize her anywhere. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking more beautiful than he remembered. But it was a child beside her that made his breath catch. The little girl looked up at Isabella with pure adoration, chattering animatedly about something that made her mother laugh. Ethan watched transfixed as they walked to a modest car parked on the street. The child climbed into a booster seat, and Isabella carefully buckled her in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. It was such a simple moment, so full of love and normalcy, that Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. He should have looked away. He should have told his driver to continue on. But something compelled him to follow as Isabella's car pulled out of the parking lot. They drove through winding streets to a neighborhood of small houses with neat yards. When Isabella parked in front of a blue house with flower boxes in the windows, Ethan had his driver stop a few houses down. He watched as the little girl bounced out of the car, racing up the front path. Isabella followed more slowly, calling out something that made the child pause and wait. They disappeared inside together, the door closing behind them on a life Ethan suddenly desperately wanted to understand. For 3 days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. He hired a private investigator, telling himself he just needed to know if Isabella was okay. The report came back quickly. Isabella Monroe, age 28, freelance graphic designer, lived alone with her 5-year-old daughter, Lila. Ethan did the math in his head, counting back to when they had divorced. The timeline was impossible to ignore. Lila had been born roughly 8 months after their separation, which meant Isabella had been pregnant when she signed those divorce papers. When she watched him walk away without a word, the realization hit him like a physical blow. He had a daughter, a child he had never known existed. 5 years of birthdays, first steps, first words, all stolen from him. The anger that surged through him was hot and immediate, followed quickly by a crushing wave of grief for all he had missed. But beneath the anger and grief was something else, a desperate, aching need to know this child, to be part of her life, to somehow make up for the years he had lost, even if he hadn't known they existed. Ethan sat in his penthouse that night, staring at the city lights and thinking about the blue house with flower boxes. Somewhere in that house was his daughter, probably sleeping peacefully, unaware that her entire world was about to change. He had built an empire, but he had failed at the only thing that truly mattered. He had let Isabella go. He had let his pride and his ambition destroy the best relationship he had ever had. And now he had a chance, however slim, to make things right.